Hi, I'm Simon Bridges, and welcome back to another Business Insights webinar run by the Auckland Business Chamber weekly, where I hope you're getting a lot out of them. And this week, I'm just delighted to have Lee Seabrook-Suckling of the iSpace, which is a recruitment and consulting firm specialising in early career. Lee's a partner there. He's going to be talking to us about something I had a bit of a chat with him about before. And I thought it was so interesting, it was worth a session, as I say, on this webinar. And that's really around, but you'll see there's much more to it than just the title suggests, retention and progression in a multi-generational workplace. So Lee, we're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks for
And
having us, man.
I'll chip in from time to time. And yeah, I think people are going to find it just fascinating, but also insightful and helpful in terms of how to deal with that multi-generational workplace, which we're all in these days.
Absolutely. All right, let me just share my screen. All right, thank you so much to the Chamber for having me today. So we're going to talk about retention and progression in a multi-generational workplace. And really the key driver behind this is retaining your top talent and creating an optimal and sustainable workplace culture. Now, I want to start by we're going to be talking for 30 minutes, but I'm going to give you the three key takeaways that you're going to get from the next 30 minutes first, so you know what you're going to get yourself into. The first is that staff, especially Gen Z members, we don't call them Gen Z, even though Kiwis do say Z, we're using Z. They generally leave their jobs because of lack of four things: the leadership, condition, passion, and progression. Now, it's not normally about salary. Now, what I mean by not normally about salary is that's assuming that you're paying a market acceptable rate to your staff. All right. So if you're paying well below what the market expects, people are going to leave you. That's not what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to be discussing everything else that comes into it, right?
And I'm look, annoying uncle here who's out
I'll
of
do it.
Gen Z, as you say, we're talking what age groups roughly?
So Gen Z are born from 1997 through 2010. So the youngest of them are still at high school now. They're in their later years of high school, and the oldest of them are in their late 20s. So they're the ones that are in their first 5 or so years of their careers at your organizations.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So generally just think about them as people in their 20s. That's the best way to understand. All right, the second thing is that a combination of external coaching and internal mentoring really is how you create a better emotional salary. I'll go into what an emotional salary is in a minute. And that is what people stay in jobs for in lieu of the higher wages, which organizations are unable to provide at the moment because we're in a difficult economy. People are looking for something a little bit more instead of and more emotionally instead of getting it financially. And then the last thing, even though we're talking a lot about generations today, is that you're, as an organization, whether you are a private sector business, whether you're a public sector ministry, whatever, your retention and progression strategy needs to be bespoke. There's no silver bullet in this, and every individual, despite being a part of a generation, needs to be treated like an individual, but not a stereotype. So those are our three key takeaways today. I thought I would first actually start though by taking us back about 10 years and really giving you a bit of a screenshot of how we've gotten here in the workplace. Because in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of cultural changes in society that have really dramatically impacted how we operate just here in our own, New Zealand workplaces. So around 10 years ago, sort of really kicking things off was the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter. And those sort of really lit up a kind of an activist, kind of an activist thing in modern society. This was also around, the Trump era, the Brexit era as well. So political polarization really kicked up about 10 years ago and has continued today. Here in New Zealand, we had around 5 years ago the integration of Tau Māori, which started in the public sector, but quite quickly moved into the private sector, has had quite some significant cultural impacts on our workplaces. Then, of course, can't forget the COVID-19 pandemic. Don't need to go into that. We all know what happened there. But with that also came virtual working, work from home expectations. And whilst the pandemic itself is in the back mirror, those expectations have stuck around. In more recent times, sort of in the last 12 months or so, there's also been a lot of restructures, redundancies, and that sort of thing. Companies looking, or organizations looking to be more efficient. And of course, like I mentioned at the beginning of this, Gen Z entering the workforce. So a lot of them actually entered the workforce during the pandemic. They entered in a virtual world. They had their onboarding and first few months from home. So that has considerably changed their outlook on what it is like to be in a modern workplace. Most importantly, we've got 4 different generations in a workplace now. So we've got baby boomers. Baby boomers are, the post-World War II children, so born in the generally 50s and 60s. Gen Xers are really now they're our generation of C-suite now. So they're our senior leaders now. Millennials, so I put myself as a millennial. I was born in 85 and in my late 30s now. And then Gen Z, so they're our youngest generation. So potentially in one single team, you could have a 4-person team in your organization, and you've got 4 different generations with completely divergent ways of working. They've got completely different values, and all of that causes quite a lot of friction, as we know a lot of organizations are seeing, because they just don't work together as well as they should. Next, let's talk a little bit about employee turnover and why people are leaving jobs in 2024. Now, like I said, we are in a difficult economy. Things are definitely looking up with, recent OCR cuts and interest rates and all sorts of things. We are definitely looking up, but the last 12 months have been quite difficult, yet people have continued to leave stable jobs. Why is that? It doesn't quite make sense, right? I look back at, I came out of university in 2006, 2007, had a good year or so, and then the global financial crisis happened. So as an older millennial, I have a fear of leaving a job whenever there's economic difficulties, right? Because I've been taught that if you've got something stable, you must keep it. That's not what's happening at the moment. So there's an old adage that people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. You've probably heard something to that tune before. And look, that is really valuable in concept, but it really only tells part of the story. The rest, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, comes down to the emotional salary. So what are the non-tangible, non-monetary reasons that people stay in a job? And people really move on, as we've discovered, for 4 things, because it's a lack of leadership. Don't really need to explain what that means. People don't like, the managers that they work for and their management styles. Conditions, those really come down to things like workload, work-life balance, particularly, as I said earlier, with redundancies and restructures. We're definitely finding a lot of younger people, so people in the first, when I say younger people, we're talking in the first 15 years of your professional career, who have had additional responsibilities placed on them. Maybe they are, say you're a lawyer or an engineer or another or you're in another industry where your professionalism is your core business and has to come over all else. You've had all these other responsibilities when it comes to people leadership, HR stuff, and those are really at odds with each other, because you at the forefront have to deliver your professional service, whether that's your legal advice or your technical engineering skill or whatever. Really, what I think is the most important and where we really come in is passion and progression. So those are the two key reasons why people are leaving jobs in 2024. Now, 63% of people leave jobs leave so because they don't see an active pathway forward for themselves. 63%. Now, I've just been reading some data this morning from Gallup, the consultancy, and in 2024, apparently only 3 in 10 employees are actively engaged in their job. So that means 7 of your 10 employees are in what's called an assessment phase. The assessment phase really is, should I stay? Should I go? Am I happy here in Auckland working in Queen Street, or should I go to Sydney? Should I go to Melbourne? Should I go to London? Should I look at a bigger organization? Should I, they're in the assessment phase. Now that's the stage where people are most pliable and most malleable, and that's where you really need to get them, because once they move into the disengagement stage, which about 18% of people in jobs are in the disengagement stage, that's when, sorry, about 18% of that person's salary goes into them being disengaged, if that makes sense. So that's a really tough place to pull somebody out of. You really need to address your people when they're in that assessment stage, or those that are already really happy in those jobs, those 3 out of 10 people that are engaged, figuring out how do you propel them forward? How do you make sure that their passion and their progression is harnessed in a positive way so you can keep them and your organization can keep growing? Emotional salary. I mentioned that before. I'm not going to paraphrase. I'm just going to literally quote the magazine Fast Company on what that means exactly. An emotional salary is the non-monetary compensation that impacts how people feel about their job, like culture, career, and work-life balance. For instance, getting real and relevant feedback from a manager or having a coworker proactively check on you helps you feel supported, and that falls under the umbrella of emotional salary. So these are the facets of emotional salary drive outcomes of validation, belonging, and fulfillment. So that idea of community, those are all meaningful perks that a pay bump, cash cannot replicate. I know I said I wasn't going to paraphrase that, and I did anyway. And so here's what's really important. Gen Z, our youngest cohort of professional workers, next year are going to make 1/3 of the workforce. Okay, 1/3. They are going to outnumber baby boomers next year. And their key reason for staying in a job, what they want, is a healthy emotional salary. That's their number one priority on who they choose to work for. And they very much, this is a generation that is very keen on purpose, and they need to know who they're working for. They need to believe in who they're working for, and they need to know why they're doing the jobs that they are doing, because as anyone that is managing Gen Z at the moment knows, this is a generation that speaks up when they're uncomfortable. Now, this isn't a new thing, by the way. We're giving Gen Z a hard time about being a bit precious or being a bit sensitive, right? Now, the same thing happened to my generation, millennials, 10 or 15 years ago. Simon, I'm sure you remember when we were told that the reason we weren't buying houses was because we're spending too much money on avocado on toast. Do you remember that?
Exactly.
Yeah, you remember that, right?
Um, all true, Lee.
Not to take into account, the global financial crisis that we entered the workforce into, the series of difficulties that we had finding our feet in the professional world and that sort of thing. No, it was just avocado on toast. But so we were called lazy and entitled as well. You will recall 10, 15 years ago. This is what we do to every younger generation that comes up. They have different values, different priorities, and we as older generations put a negative spin on that. So whilst it does feel like Gen Z are, quote, the most difficult generation to work for, and there's a lot of managers and a lot of studies, in fact, that actually say that Gen Z are the most difficult to work with. That's really not true. It's just our perspective on the current generation, and we're always going to hold that against the youngest generation. Think of it like technology. We're always a little bit, right now we're a little bit scared about the future of AI, right? If you look back at the 20th century, they were scared about radio. They were scared about TV, all of these things. We are scared of what's coming up. So just acknowledging that, I think, is a really important sort of touch point for everybody who is in a position of managing a younger generation and thinking, and it feels really stuck, feels like they don't know where to go. You're not alone. Everyone is feeling this, and everyone who has been in your position throughout human history has felt this as well. So it's really important to, sort of take stock of that. What are the associated costs with employee turnover? This one is probably really going to surprise you. So as I mentioned before, an actively disengaged employee costs you 18% of their salary. So say you've got someone on 100K, just being disengaged, that's going to cost you $18,000 a year. Why is it going to cost that much? You will have seen this. There are lots of different terms from it. I call it productivity theater. Some people call it performative busyness. You know what it's like, and you can often tell when your staff are coming to work every day, but they're just not feeling it. They're just not giving, they're pretending to be productive. They are giving you a facade of being busy, but it's just not happening. That's where that 18%, or like I said, on 100K salary, that 18 grand, that's where it's going. It's going into theater. Forbes research suggests that it costs 30 to 40% of a person's annual salary to replace them. So once if you've gone through that assessment phase, you've decided, I want to leave, I want to move to Melbourne, I want to move to another organization, whatever it is, it's going to cost 30 to 40%. So to keep with that 100K figure, 30 to 40 grand. That's in, recruitment and onboarding, etc. But what that really that's just that's the monetary costs, right? What that doesn't include are the soft costs that are incurred with turnover. Now, there are three key parts. I'm going to focus on the last one here, but there's obviously so these are the costs that your entire organization has to absorb when a single person leaves. Now, there's obviously time and resources required from management. So you will need your senior leaders buy-in. If you want to think about your senior leaders and what they cost as at an hourly rate or however you charge your senior leaders out, it's a significant amount of time, particularly in the first 6 months. But to be honest, for a lot, particularly with technical jobs, it can be 2 years of really keeping on top of someone with the onboarding process. Obviously, there's handover, training, review of work's another huge one. A review of work costs a lot of money that you don't actually see going in and out of your organization's bank account. But really, the most important one that I'm really passionate about are the costs that are associated with the loss of productivity and low morale when people are leaving. So when your staff are having conversations around why they'd be better off going to Sydney because the market's so much better there, or going to London because of this and because of that, that creates really low morale within the organization and has a flow-on effect to the other staff members, which puts everybody in that mode of that assessment phase place. So when you stand back, for a mid-level employee, it can actually cost you around 150% of their annual salary to replace them. So to use the 100K figure again, about $150,000 for a highly trained or technical job like an engineer, about 200%, and it just goes up and up. When you're looking at C-suite, it can cost up to 400% of that person's salary to replace them. And just think, you would have seen, Simon, when when a new CEO comes in, just look at the upheaval that happens, and just how a lot of organizations, or the people within the organizations, just kind of freeze, and they're just not sure what's going on because their CEO is finding their feet, and often takes a good year at least for a CEO to figure out what they're doing with their organization. So that has a really big impact. So to turn this into a positive, this presents us with an invitation. It presents us with an invitation of understanding, how much does retention of your top talent really mean to you? How many of your star staff, the people that you fundamentally can't or do not want to function without for the future of your organization, how much is that costing you? And how is a retention and progression program, which is obviously what we do at ICE, how is that going to aid you in halting that high turnover? And really crucially, not just halting it, but also strategizing development of your workplace culture. So you've got a really enviable place, someone there that someone really wants to work in. Think of the way that maybe 20 years ago, we thought about Google as a workplace, with its cafeteria and its slides. And, Google 20 years ago, obviously things are a little bit different now, but Google 20 years ago was the ideal place to work for work-life balance. That's the kind of cultures that going forward, we're going to need to create, but we're not going to do it with slides. We're not going to do it with free food. We're going to do it with emotional salaries. Why focus on emerging leaders now? So as I said, emerging leaders for us really are in that 7 to 15 year of their career mark. Now, generally, these are people that are under 40, but I don't like to put an age number on that, because a lot of people join the professional workforce at different stages of their lives. I've had a client that had children in her very early 20s and didn't enter the professional world until her mid-30s, and then wasn't at this stage until her late 40s, early 50s. So generally, we're saying the first 7 to 15 years of your career, so professional career, that is. Now, leading isn't just about getting today's job done. It's not just about what needs done today, Simon. It's about ensuring your team still want to come work tomorrow, the next day, in 5 years' time, hopefully in 10 years' time, right? And the roles of manager and leader are often, they're used synonymously, but I don't think they're synonymous, right? A future-proofed leadership style in your organization's ethos really needs to focus on leadership. I'm going to ask you a question here, Simon. Manage, the term as a verb, to manage. Can you think of a synonym for that? If you're just managing,
I was going to say performance management, but it's the same word. To manage is to it's just to sort of deal with functionally.
Exactly. So another synonym that I like that really effectively helps me understand what the difference between manager and leader is. To manage is to cope. It's to keep your hands on all of the on all of the things and making sure that things are working. But think about the word coping. Coping means you are only just keeping your head above water. The difference between that and leadership is a dramatic step above that. Leadership is a lot of delegation, but it is being somebody that people look up to. There's someone that the people that are in who have management responsibilities are actively inspired by. And like I said, leading isn't about getting today's job done. It's ensuring that people still want to come to work tomorrow. Does that make sense in the kind of...
Definitely, and manage definitely connotes that as well. It denotes that, that it's sort of manage speaks to business as usual, just coping, getting the day-to-day done, as opposed to leadership, which hopefully has a sense of the longer term and the future focus.
Exactly. And that's really, like I mentioned, with restructures, redundancies, and a lot of the changes we've sort of seen in particularly the last 12 months in the New Zealand workforce, that idea of just coping or just barely keeping your head above water is something that a lot of people in management positions are feeling. They're feeling like they are just able to breathe and they're just keeping their people happy. Their own personal mental health is probably, may have been fallen by the wayside, but that's not their priority. Their priority is their people. So if you're in that 7 to 15 year period, you are you're the emerging leaders that really need the most energy put into at the moment. So whether they are someone that's just taking on whether you're taking on a new external hire that's going into a management position, perhaps you've got a mid-level professional that's taking on their first direct report, or maybe you're someone that's been promoted internally to manage a team that's larger than they've ever managed before. Coaching them in that first 15 years is absolutely crucial. Now, we have a saying at ICE that we want to create a generation of managers that we needed when we were 22 years old. And that really is really core to what I'm speaking about here today. So getting emerging leaders in those first 15 years, that stability and longevity aids your entire organization to prosper long-term with fewer interpersonal issues and much healthier team dynamics. So this is the kind of stuff that is going to have these emerging leaders now are going to be C-suite in 10, 15, 20 years time. So these are the people that you really need to focus on. So when we are looking at the future, you've got a really wonderful, really healthy sense of leadership in your organization, which of course has positive outcomes for any organization's bottom line. Don't have to, explain what that means, right? Now, I've come up with this phrase, coaches need coaching too, because if you're going to shepherd a team of successful leaders, it's vital to be the best that you can as a leader yourself. And that means ongoing professional development. It means understanding that you're never too experienced to learn new ways of leadership, new ways of doing things. And senior leaders also need support in identifying what their strengths are, and so how they can pass those down to their emerging leaders. So regular coaching sessions with senior leaders is also really important, alongside emerging leaders, because that'll help. First of all, it helps you kind of download. It's like when you go to your GP, right? You go to your GP and you kind of download all the things that are impacting in your life, and your GP will throw something out there and think, oh, maybe you're not getting enough sleep. Maybe if you started getting some more sleep, everything else, let's prioritize sleep for you. Everything else will start flowing a little bit better because of that. So this is really about developing habits that create real change for senior leaders, that give them a consistent dedication and a socially aware expert leadership style that they're then able to pass down to their emerging leaders. Look, if you're not taking care of yourself, how are we going to take care of other people? And this really goes into the next thing. It can be really lonely at the top. If you're a senior executive, you're often forgotten about in your quest for organizational success when it comes to your people management. Because even though you are in this pastoral care mode for everybody else, yet nobody's looking out for you. So if you're a CEO and you're trying to make sure that you're doing the best for your team, your mental and physical health also needs to be your priority. Because how can you lead a company, Simon, if you're barely coping with the day-to-day yourself? And like I said before, if you're a CEO, no one checks in on you and says, how are you doing? Do they? Never happens. Never happens. So executive coaching and mentorship really fosters an environment where you can, as a senior executive, let your guard, like I said, like going to your GP, you can let your guard down. You can will uncover your vulnerabilities and turn them into strengths. Work through those interpersonal issues that normally you're left to work through alone. And it is really lonely when when you've got a team of people, maybe you've got some friction, you come home at night, whether you've got, maybe a partner or a family as well, maybe you've got your partner to talk to, but often you're just going to internalize it and you're going to go around and around and around and get yourself into this anxiety spiral. We want to change that. We want to get into a situation where you prioritize and delegate efficiently. You're juggling a healthy work-life balance yourself. And that is this is leadership from the top down. This is the kind of ethos that you're going to pass down to your next generation of leaders as well. So I've talked about mentorship a little bit here. There is a difference between mentorship and coaching. So I want to sort of explain that. So as a leadership coach, my job is to go in and do what we're talking about before. I'm like the GP, right? Mentorship is more of I see it being more valuable when it's internal, and this idea of co-mentorship that we do at ICE, while I said there are no silver bullets in this, if anything could come close, it's co-mentorship and the facilitation of that. So what is co-mentorship and why is it key in a multi-generational workplace? So at the core of it, it's focused on manaakitanga. It's focused on the concept of reciprocal sharing of information and receiving of information, learning and teaching at the same time. Co-mentorship it's a horizontal way of teaching and learning, and it's really centered around humility. It's around acknowledging what you don't know or understand and being open to learning. Now, why this is so helpful in the current workplace environment is because that younger generation of Gen Z, one of their key things that they absolutely need is to be heard. This is why we think they're so loud and obnoxious. It's because they just want to be heard and they are voicing their concerns. The concerns that Gen Z have about the modern workforce, these aren't new concerns. This is just the first generation that's bold enough to voice them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so co-mentorship is an opportunity to trade knowledge between junior and senior staff members. There's no hierarchy. They're on the same playing field. And the benefit of this is you create understanding, bonding, and reciprocal learning based on empathy. So if you've got a baby boomer, someone in their late 50s or early 60s, co-mentor in a co-mentorship relationship with someone who's 25, both of you have come into this relationship understanding that you've got something to teach and you've got something to learn. So it doesn't rely on the senior colleague having superior expertise. Instead, both parties are coming together and you've got a goal of imparting knowledge and learning in kind. Now, I said there is no silver bullet, but if there's anything close, particularly with engaging Gen Z, who, by the way, like I said, are going to make up a third of the workforce next year, this is the kind of buy-in that they fundamentally crave. This is so important. And the facilitation of that is not easy, right? Co-leadership does lead to three key outcomes. Obviously, buy-in from both sides, just mentioned that. Intergenerational understanding and cooperation. So I mentioned the word empathy before. Empathy has become a bit of a buzzword in the corporate world recently. I'm sure you would have heard it. Authentic leadership is obviously something that I'm very hot on. But empathy, I think, understanding the frustrations of a younger employee and being able to apply them to your own frustrations as a more senior employee. This is something that I think is really key in getting over some of that friction that we're seeing where people of different generations just aren't communicating effectively. Why is this all relevant to leadership? Look, Simon, I've been in the communication industry for 18 years now. The key thing that I've learned is that leadership is all about effective communication. You can get MBAs, you can do all sorts of other things, but really it's about communication. It's about how you talk to your team, and not just how you talk to them, because now we have so many other ways of communication. It's how you engage with them via email, via Teams, via text, all of these other things. This is what leadership is today. Result of all of this, and the result of co-mentorship, is a significant enhancement of social capital for individuals. So by social capital, I mean their buy-in and how they feel about their job and their place in your organization, and for your organization holistically as well. Because if you've got individuals within your team being treated as individuals, then as a team holistically, you guys are going to go gangbusters, right? Solutions have to be bespoke, though. They can't be copy and paste. So going to workshops about how to understand or manage Gen Z don't tend to be all that helpful, because they ball them all up into one personality, which is not, none of us have a, as I've talked about myself as a millennial before, but there are a lot of things about millennial culture that I don't identify with. We are far more than a 10 or 15 band of time in which we were born, right? So solutions need to be bespoke and really focused on every individual's purpose and passion. So purpose meaning, why am I here? Why am I at my desk today? What am I doing? What is the reason for this Excel worksheet? What's the reason for this presentation? What is the reason for this meeting? So that's key. And then passion. Why am I in this job, period? What good am I doing for this business, for society at large? What is my overall contribution? And that is something that is fundamentally driving Gen Z, is they need to be passionate about what they're doing. They need it. This is a fundamental underlining for them. They don't want to do they don't do jobs for the paycheck. That's something that's really key to understand. And so by supercharging this engagement with leadership coaching and the facilitation of co-mentorship and a bunch of other things, that, like I said, there are no copy and paste solutions, but there are lots of different other ways to engage your team, has been shown to increase engagement by a person by 41% after 6 months. So if you go through a coaching program, one-on-one, or you have a co-mentorship situation, you are going to be dramatically more engaged than if you're just left alone. Now, I really want to focus on those people, and I really want organizations and anyone listening today to think about those staff members that you are leaving alone and you can feel them starting to disengage. Now is the time to act with these people. Don't let them get into the disenfranchised stage where they want to leave. You can do something about it now. That's really the end of what I wanted to chat about. But Simon, I'm sure you have a million questions for me, or
Oh,
so
look,
thank you for
fantastic.
listening.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, I suppose just to channel that annoying uncle I said I was at the start. I mean, there'd be a bit of a view, amongst those older Gen X, bosses these days. Oh, look, this is so high maintenance. They're so high maintenance, these Gen Zers. And actually, the job market's changing. It's getting a bit harder. Unemployment's going up. Do we need to sort of worry about all of this? Or can't we just do the things the way we've always done them, remain unempathetic, and focused on, the core kind of business outcome? And I presume the answer to that is, well, but if you do that, you'll end up facing more cost.
Yep.
Actually, this is a more effective way through, and just the reality of how you have to do things in the modern era.
I mean, my personal opinion on that is, if you're gonna follow the old ways of leadership, like you sort of laid out, and I say this really in earnest, I think you've got about 5 more years where you can get away with it. I don't think in 10 years' time this is going, as I said, in 10 years' time, this younger generation are going to be mid-level. They're just not going to put up with it. So if you want to stay in your role for the next 5 years like this, and then you're looking to get out, you might be able to keep going with this if you still want to be going in 10 years time or 20 years time. If you want your organization to thrive, you really need to start working on this stuff now. And yeah, it is high maintenance in the beginning, but it's really about holistic culture change. And once you've got a holistic culture change, it's not high maintenance at all. It's business as usual. So we're really just trying to change what business as usual means to every leader.
Fantastic. And I think, look, I think any business a boss who's employed a few and had a few staff members will recognize this productivity or performative theatre thing you've mentioned.
Mm. And it is.
People who are sort of making clear, oh, we've just done X and Y and Z and jumping around, and they're kind of oftentimes the ones who probably actually sort of aren't up to too much. And then the other thing that I don't know that you talk about too much today, but we've talked about, you and I, is this issue of well, you did talk about emerging leaders, those in that 7 to 15 year period, but oftentimes for them, look, they can plateau. It's plateauing where nothing's sort of happening for them. So, and all of that, I suppose it's just you talked about how we need to provide passion and progression.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's not as easy to do as all of that. What are some sort of things? Is it just about, in terms of your coaching and co-mentorship, the relational piece in this, or what? Are there other tips
so
you have?
this is really where the concept of pathways comes in extremely effective. So like I said, 63% of people who leave a job do so because they don't see a clear pathway forward. So whilst you may not able to be offering pay bumps or job title bumps at the moment, what you can do is work with your emerging leaders to help them see the wider picture of where they're going if they do X, Y, and Z. Now, there are formal ways of doing that, and there are also really informal ways of doing that. Things have dramatically changed. We're not in a world of the 40-year career before anymore, rather, where you just go to work and you have time-based promotions. What is really effective in pathways is showing the kind of achievements and the kind of processes that do need to be followed. And if you do them, that is how you will succeed. Now, that is the transparency that is so unbelievably valuable to these younger generations. Just having a blueprint of where you're going is going to keep you engaged in a job, because you're not just turning up every day wondering what you're doing. You know that in a year's time, you might be here. In 5 years' time, you might be here. That drive, that kind of fire under your feet can really propel you forward.
Fantastic. And in talking about leadership coaching and co-mentorship, there's some really interesting stuff in there. But I suppose just what do you do? I mean, if it's the leader who needs a bit of help in terms of getting the soft skills really that are required, what are you doing with these leaders to sort of help them on that journey?
Well, really, for me, it's about vulnerability. So the difference between coming to a coach like me, or at ICE, and going to, say, a traditional counselor, is really around the idea of self-disclosure. I share a lot of the things that I've been through in my leadership journey. That allows people to share the things that they've gone through. We can create a mutual understanding of just how difficult it is. And Simon, things are really difficult. So by bringing those barriers down, we're able to have really authentic conversations and actually work through the problems and figure out what are those soft skills that you need to work on. And like I said, more often than not, the communication skills. It's not about your professionalism. And there's also, and I really want to hit hard on this, there's no shame in needing to talk to somebody. I know in New Zealand, we've always had a bit of a stigma around asking for help, but sometimes you just need a sounding board. You need somebody to listen to you and mirror it back to you and then give you unique or different perspectives. I my personal approach does have a bit of tough love to it, right? Which I do think is important because I want to validate you, but I also want to give you some perspectives of everybody else, because I think without those perspectives, it's very easy to silo yourself. And like I mentioned earlier, it can be really lonely at the top. So just having somebody to offer those new perspectives in an objective way, I think this is also why it's really important to have an external person come in, because internally you're in that silo, and it is really hard to see what's going on in your own house sometimes, if that makes sense. Having that fresh perspective can be so crucial. And look, it's not something that takes that long. I often find if I'm sitting with a senior leader for 2, 3, 5 sessions, by the end of that, we have got a really solid outline of where you're at, what are the problems that you're facing, and we've got a plan to get you unstuck. So that's the real key thing that a coach can help you with, is getting you unstuck, which is what most people really who are struggling right now, that's what they need. They need to figure out a way forward.
Fantastic. Look, that resonates a lot with me. It's been great to talk with you, Lee. I think it's a really interesting and helpful session to probably to well, maybe to the Gen Zers out there who are wanting to understand what's going on with their boss, but also I think for
Yeah.
those bosses. Yeah.
I do think I think all 4 generations that are currently in the workforce can take something from listening to what I've had to say today. And like I mentioned the word empathy before, if we can understand each other's experience a little bit more, we are going to be more productive in the workforce, and that is going to have a better effect on everyone's bottom line.
Yeah, it's a great way to end. Thanks so much, my friend. Really
All
appreciate
right. Thanks so much, Simon. Cheers.